going to cultural sensitivity. All this is you being aware that there are cultural differences and similarities between people. So the first thing we're going to do is an activity called blue black versus white gold. On the next section, you're going to see a picture and you will indicate what color you see. In your notebook to the right, type and tell me what color you saw, what you paid attention to first, and your thoughts on other people who may have seen a different color. So with this picture, and many of you may have seen this before, may have participated in this, but it was really popular on social media at one point in time. Some people saw the color blue-black, and others saw white and gold. So now you're just going to look at this picture, you're going to say what color you saw, and then we're going to actually have a discussion on this via Canvas or via Zoom as well. So just make sure that you take your time looking here at the picture to determine what color you see. So now, with that, and with our debriefing and reflection, what was the color you saw? And was it correct? Did you consider and listen to what other people saw and felt? Does what you see on the outside affect what you know about something? When you see a person that looks different than you, does that affect what you feel about them? Why or why not? So we're using this as our debriefing and reflection to the activity that we just did, and we're tying it into being culturally sensitive. So as you know, in a world that we live in, not everyone looks like us. So are you culturally sensitive to where you're aware of those differences? You still treat people with respect. You don't let stereotypes or any prejudice ideas dictate how you treat them. So that's where this overlaps at. So that's why we had the discussion talking about what color we saw on the dress and you analyzing if you were able to respect someone else's decision that was different than yours. So that's how all of this kind of ties together. So just be mindful of that when you're answering the questions. So a summary. It's important to always be open-minded and sensitive to other cultures because the world doesn't just work one way. You also never know how a person who looks different than you can help or add to you. Different cultures have different outlooks and experiences with things, so always be open and receptive to seeing a different perspective. All right, so now we're going to go to implicit bias. So implicit bias is attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, our actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. So an example, it would be judging a person by their name. Oftentimes we hear someone's name and we use it to dictate their skin color and what type of person they are. Seeing a person of a certain skin color and automatically thinking the best or worst about them. So obviously we know that this isn't always the case, but it does certainly happen. So now you're going to click the link and you're going to take an implicit bias quiz. The quiz is not the end-all be-all, but it's simply being used to just make you aware that we all have implicit bias in one way or another. So you'll click on the link there. Once you have access to that presentation, then you'll take that quiz. So now we're going to another activity for examples. So I'm giving you 3 examples on the right of real-life scenarios. While reading, I want you to identify the implicit bias in the stories. Remember, implicit bias includes attitudes, stereotypes, and preconceived notions of a person or a thing. So our first example, Ahmed Arbery was jogging in his neighborhood one morning when he was profiled by 2 neighborhood residents that were of a different race. These residents said Ahmad resembled a suspect accused of local break-ins. It later came out that the police of that town said that there were no reports filed about the local break-ins. The 2 residents armed themselves and pursued Ahmad in a pickup truck. Ahmad was unarmed and trying to run away. In his failed efforts, the 2 residents pursued Ahmad, which led to a struggle, which ultimately led to Ahmad being shot and killed. What are some potential implicit biases from this story? So I want you to reread that, and I want you to think of potential implicit biases within this story. And why are they implicit biases? Example 2. Trayvon Martin went into a convenience store to get candy and a drink. As he walked back home, he had a dark-colored hoodie over his head. George Zimmerman, who was a volunteer on this neighborhood watch, called police saying Trayvon looked suspicious while he walked home. The guy looked like he was up to no good or he's on drugs or something. That's what he quoted. George pursued and followed Trayvon, which led to an altercation and resulted in Trayvon being shot and killed. What are some potential implicit biases from this story? So just like you did in example 1, reread it and point out some possible implicit biases and tell me why there are implicit biases. Example 3. Craig, who is a local drug dealer who was doing his normal duties in Chicago, a predominantly black area. One night, a white male comes up to him asking questions and wanted to get service. Craig quickly declines because this is an unusual in a predominantly black area, and he runs off. What are some potential implicit biases from this story? So just like example 1 and 2, you're going to reread, and you're going to point out possible implicit biases and tell me why they are implicit biases. So now we're going to real world application and identifying our own personal implicit biases. So after taking the quiz, we've gone over notes, we've seen the lecture, and we've identified an example of what implicit bias is. So what implicit biases do you have? The first step to changing our mindset and doing better is to be honest with yourself and those around you at all times. Do you see a need to change your implicit biases? Why or why not? And where do you feel these implicit biases came from? So we're using this as more so of a reflection and debriefing. And of course, you'll answer this in your interactive notebook, and we'll also discuss this as well during our synchronous virtual day. So that concludes our lecture on cultural sensitivity and implicit bias. I'll also upload another presentation for Fix the Issue. That way you can have video of that lecture as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out via email or ask questions online. If you have questions, please do not hesitate.